What if fitting in wasn't about your achievements, your grades, or your popularity? What if it was about how you looked, who your parents were, or simply the color of your skin? At Ridgeway Academy, these questions were more than just thoughts. They were the truth that Maya Sinclair had to live with every day. A school known for its wealth, its legacy, and its exclusive environment, Ridgeway felt like a place where Maya didn't belong. She wasn't like the others. And everyone knew it as Maya walked into the bustling cafeteria, carrying her lunch tray, the weight of being an outsider pressed heavily on her shoulders. She'd learned to ignore the stares, the whispered comments, and the looks of judgment that followed her wherever she went. At Ridgeway, it didn't matter that she had earned her place. She was one of the very few black students in the school, and that alone made her different. She hadn't come from a rich family. She didn't have the last name that was printed on plaques around the school, and she didn't wear designer clothes. But she was here because she had worked for it, earned it with straight A's and leadership on the debate team. But none of that seemed to matter when Blake Kingsley was around. Blake was everything Ridgeway Academy stood for. Blonde hair, an expensive wardrobe, and an air of arrogance that made him the epitome of everything everyone else envied. His last name was on the building. His family contributed to every fundraiser, and he walked around with a smug look that screamed entitlement. To Maya, he represented all the privileges she would never have. Before Maya could even sit down, Blake's voice rang out, dripping with sarcasm. "Well, well, well," Blake said, sneering from across the room. "Look who thinks she belongs here." Maya felt the sting of his words before she even looked up. She kept her head down, focused on her tray, trying to ignore the rising tension around her. She had been here before, after all. That Blake's laughter filled the air, and a few of his friends joined in. "Did you sneak in on a free lunch, or did they make an exception for you today?" he mocked. "What? Did they lower the bar for someone like you to be here?" The laughter from his table spread across the room, and Maya could feel the familiar heat of humiliation creeping up her neck. She clenched her jaw, holding back the words she desperately wanted to say. She had heard it all before. It was always the same. Every time she stepped into a room, every time she tried to fit in, she was reminded that she didn't belong. "I paid for my lunch," Maya said, her voice steady but firm, though her stomach churned. "Just like everyone else." Blake's laugh was loud and exaggerated. "Oh, sure, I bet you did." "With what? Your merit?" He raised an eyebrow, the words dripping with mockery that Maya's stomach twisted, but she didn't flinch. She had heard these words too many times before, and she would not let him have the power to break her. "You really think you can just walk in here like you belong?" Blake spat, his tone full of disdain. "We all know you're just a charity case." Maya could feel the sting of his words, but she didn't let them break her resolve. She had been told that she didn't belong for years. She had been told she wasn't good enough, that she was just a token at this school, nothing more than a checkbox for diversity. But today, she was done with that narrative. "Let's talk about privilege, Blake," Maya said, her voice cutting through the tension. "You want to talk about earning your place? Fine. But you're here because your parents donate buildings. They buy you a seat at the table. You didn't earn anything." For a moment, Blake stood frozen. His smirk faltered, his confidence slipping away as he tried to process her words. The silence in the cafeteria was palpable, the echoes of his laughter replaced with uncomfortable whispers. "You want to talk about competition?" Maya continued, standing tall now, her posture strong. "You don't know what it's like to struggle, Blake. You don't know what it's like to have to prove yourself every single day just to be here. Don't talk to me about earning my place." Blake's face reddened, his jaw tightening with anger. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time, Blake Kingsley was speechless. The room hung in silence, all eyes on him, waiting for him to respond. But he didn't. Before he could gather himself, the cafeteria doors swung open. Principal Stevenson walked in, his presence demanding immediate attention. "What's going on here?" Principal Stevenson's voice was firm, cutting through the tension like a blade. Blake straightened up quickly, his face quickly reverting to a forced smile. "Nothing, sir," he said, trying to maintain his composure. "Just explaining how things work around here." Principal Stevenson didn't look at Blake. His gaze was fixed on Maya. "Is that so?" he asked, his voice even calm. Maya didn't need to explain herself. She knew that what she had said was enough. And in that moment, she knew Blake's smug attitude wouldn't last forever. Turning toward Mrs. Delacroix, the cafeteria staff member nearby, Principal Stevenson asked, "Mrs. Delacroix, could you confirm something for me?" "Of course, sir," Mrs. Delacroix replied, her voice pleasant but knowing. "The Dawsons, Aaliyah's parents, who fund the meal program here, could you verify that?" Principal Stevenson asked. The cafeteria manager nodded, causing a ripple of surprise throughout the room. "Yes, sir. The Dawsons are the primary sponsors of the meal program." The entire cafeteria went silent. Blake stood frozen, his face draining of color. Maya folded her arms across her chest, her expression calm and triumphant. "You were saying, Blake?" she asked, her tone quiet but victorious. Blake opened and closed his mouth, but no words came out. The whispers that once followed Maya now filled the air, but they weren't about her anymore. Principal Stevenson cleared his throat, then addressed Blake directly, his voice firm and commanding. "Blake Kingsley, effective immediately. You are banned from the cafeteria indefinitely. Perhaps missing a few meals will teach you some humility." The room was still as Blake stood there, speechless, the weight of the principal's words sinking in. Maya didn't move, but the faintest of smiles tugged at the corner of her lips. Karma had finally arrived. The students around her began to whisper, and the cafeteria erupted with a mix of disbelief and quiet satisfaction. Blake's reputation had shattered in an instant. And as for Maya, she knew this battle was just the beginning. Maya Sinclair stood in the cafeteria, watching Blake Kingsley stand there with his face flushed and his mouth working as if he were trying to form words but couldn't find any. A wave of satisfaction spread through her, but she didn't let herself gloat. She knew better than to let Blake see how much his humiliation pleased her. After all, it wasn't about getting back at him. It was about making a point, one that had been long overdue. The room was still, with everyone frozen in place as Principal Whitmore walked out, leaving the cafeteria in a tense silence. Maya took a deep breath, trying to calm the excitement bubbling inside her. She'd just taken a small victory against someone who had spent months, maybe even years, making her life difficult. But she was determined not to let that cloud her judgment. That A.S. Blake stood there, his eyes darting from Maya to the rest of the cafeteria. She could see the gears in his mind turning. He wasn't used to being the one on the receiving end of humiliation. And the realization that his privilege had just been exposed to everyone was clearly sinking in. "Well," Maya said, her voice steady, "you were saying something about earning your spot?" She wasn't trying to be cruel, not anymore. But she couldn't help herself. This was the first time in years that she felt like she could stand tall in front of him without fear of his mockery. Blake opened his mouth, but no words came out. He glanced at the students around him, and for the first time, he looked vulnerable. The laughter and whispers that had once followed Maya now followed him. "You might want to go to the back table, Blake," Maya added, her voice calm but firm. "It's more your speed now." "The outsider's table, remember?" There was a hint of satisfaction in her voice, but it was more about the principle of things than getting revenge. It was about making him see the world from her perspective, even if it was just for a moment. Blake didn't respond, his face a mixture of anger, disbelief, and humiliation. He turned away, shoulders slumped, and walked to the back of the cafeteria, his usual confidence shattered. Maya felt a pang of guilt, but only a little. She had been through too much to feel sorry for him. The cafeteria slowly started to buzz again as the tension lifted. Students who had once whispered about Maya now looked at her differently, almost as if they were seeing her for the first time. There were no more snickers or sideways glances. For once, she wasn't just the girl who didn't belong. She was the girl who had stood up, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, or ignored. But as she sat back down at her usual table, something else started to settle in, a sense of unease. The victory didn't feel as sweet as she had imagined. Maya had spent so long hoping for a moment like this, but now that it had come, she wasn't sure what to do with it. "You okay?" a voice broke her thoughts. Maya looked up to see her friend, Jasmine, standing by her side. She had been quiet during the whole confrontation, but Maya knew she had her back. Maya nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just still processing everything." Jasmine sat down beside her, her eyes scanning the cafeteria. You did good, Maya. People are finally seeing you for who you really are, not just the girl they want to label. But Maya didn't share Jasmine's excitement. She knew the real battle wasn't over. This moment, as satisfying as it was, wasn't going to change everything overnight. There was still work to be done. She watched Blake from a corner of her eye. He was sitting at the back table, alone, picking at his food, but not eating. He didn't look like the same Blake Kingsley who had been full of arrogance just an hour ago. But Maya knew this wasn't the end for him, not yet. His pride would recover eventually, and he'd probably try to find another way to undermine her. After all, that was the kind of person he was. But Maya had learned a valuable lesson today, one she hadn't expected to learn in the middle of the cafeteria. It wasn't about winning every battle. It was about standing your ground when it mattered most. The rest of the lunch period passed in relative quiet. Maya ate in peace, not feeling the eyes of her classmates on her like she had before. Blake's absence from his usual spot was a small victory, but the reality of it settled over her like a heavy blanket. The world had shifted, but she knew it wasn't going to be easy. There were more battles ahead, bigger ones, harder ones. But she was ready for them. After lunch, as she made her way to her next class, Maya couldn't help but think about her place at Evergreen Academy. She'd always felt like an outsider, always felt different. But today, for the first time, she realized that maybe being different wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe it was exactly what the world needed. And maybe, just maybe, her time had finally come.